Yeah, well, you could be unlucky. You could have met somebody in a bank who had a terrible bad experience in lending for the last 3 months, and they're getting kicked by their lending superiors because really the business people in the banks, their confidence must be fairly shaken. And when you read the papers every day that you did this and you did that and you do the other, you're only human, so that affects you. So, and as well as that, like bankers are like project managers. You get some people who are more skilled at it than others. And how good have you been in selling your case to the bank? Because if I'm in the bank meeting you and you haven't me convinced that this is brilliant, when I go to somebody else in the bank to present the story, if I'm not convinced, I'm not going to be very good at convincing Frank sitting upstairs looking at me like the way he's looking at me now. And imagine him judging me. He would say, Tony, would you go away and ask the question? So it's, have you sold it to the bank, and does the banker understand your business? For instance, has the bank been out to see it? Have you got them out to see it? And has the bank met the other people in your business that are no important? Have they any interaction with those people?
So, Tony, can I ask you, how often are banks going off-site into businesses? Is that a regular occurrence?
If you take your own situation, if you're making those buns and selling them to a shop, you're giving them credit. So people say, well, I give credit, but you should go out and see that shop and see what it's like, how the place is run. Do you think I'm going to get the money back from these people? Do you think they're progressive? So if if your bank is not coming out, hasn't been out to see your business, and if you haven't encouraged them whatever way you can to get out and look at your business, then, I'd say they should see it once a year, or certainly once every 2 years for a small business, depending on the size of it. But the bank should be able to, you should leave the bank in a position that they can describe your business in 5 or 6 sentences to somebody. Not all this big folder, because when you're in a bank, if you're in a decision-making situation like Frank might be, and they say head of credit or something, you're making a lot of decisions every day. Unfortunately, in the past, we got a lot of them wrong. But if you're making a lot of decisions every day, you're not going to get his attention for 3/4 of an hour. In your first 5 or 6 sentences, you'd need to be convincing Frank, well, it's worth asking questions here, but if it isn't, you're gone, really.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this before, and we were saying that if you go in to talk to your bank, more than to anybody else in any communication, when you sit down, whatever proposition that you have to put forward, really, if you can't put it forward in about 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you're not on top of it.
You're not on top of it.
Yeah, because I presume, like you said, Tony, the guy that you're speaking to is going to have to speak to somebody else, even casually.
Yeah.
After the meeting and say, well, met your man, and what's the proposition? The guy's going to have to be able to put the essence of it across
Peter, could I suggest, if you're the manager of a branch, say, I don't know, say take Rathmines, and you lent, say, 20,000 to make, and your internal audit department will come around in 6 months or 2 months and ask you, why did you do that? Well, you need to be able to say, well, look at the place he has, look at the history here, look at that. But if I can't justify to make my internal auditor or the regulator in 2 or 3, he'll say, well, you're daft. What are you at?
Why did you do it in the first place?
Why you do it in the first place? And you need to put me in the position that I can answer that. And you need to be able to keep me updated so that I know how you're going.
Bringing all this down to basically people who are watching it this morning, if they're going to make a proposal to a bank, well, first of all, they can get advice, and it's one of the things actually that we do here in terms of just, apart from the project managing of the whole change thing, is if you have a proposition you want to put in the bank, from the communication part of it, not necessarily the financial part, although we can get Tony involved in that if you want to, but the actually how to put it together. We're really saying here, Tony, that there's a top line rationale for us that really is explainable across in a couple of minutes, and that the key points in that are then substantiated as you go down through it, and that's about it. You don't need necessarily the massive big folder. You can have it in background, but the guy that you're convincing won't be convinced by the folder.
Absolutely.
He'll be convinced by the logic. Is that?
If you look at a page, I think we get far too much more information today than we need. Socrates years ago, he said that he used to go to all these shops and stores way back in the time he lived, and somebody asked him one day, why are you doing all this, Mr. Socrates? You'd never buy anything. Well, he says, I just go to see the things I don't need. And how wise was that today?
It's pretty clever. So Tony, if we're running the business, then we get it back we're now back into the new restructured business, and the guys were talking about over the last couple of weeks around that, when the restructured business, now we're moving on, we've got the people all pumped up and ready to go. One of the things in relation to that, and like people here run our own kind of business, and we know it as well, getting paid. We talked about it earlier, but just getting the money, getting paid and getting it in time, and looking at that whole getting the money in part of the business. Could you just talk to us about that for a second, Tony? Because what happens is typically we will, and confess hands up here in my own business, head down, working with clients. There's somebody down there will sort this.
Yeah,
it's kind of, that's the way, I know, and then you come back and you know, then you have to spend 4 or 5 days really.
Well, that's the biggest challenge that people have today, and it's getting paid. And we need to look at it slightly differently. That you are a bank then, because if people are not paying, you're lending to them. And we talk about, actually ask the question, how often have you got the bank out? But how often have you gone to see the people you're selling to have a look at what they're like, see how they operate? And in a gut feel, what's your gut feel after having looked at them? So that's the first thing I would do, would go out there and I'd say. And the other thing, say you're turning over, I don't know, £500,000 a year, and you're given maybe 2 months credit. Like a week of that will save you 10,000. If you can cut that by a week, you have another 10,000 in. And because the suppliers now, their ability to get credit insurance is really reduced, so they're less willing to take risk on you. So they'll want to get paid up front. And things like that I find that people can do is watch their credit terms with the suppliers. You can say, well, they give me 30 days credit. People say, much credit, 30 days. But I say, is it 30 days from when? Oh, it's 30 days from the goods come in. Well, I said, your man drops in the goods for you on the 3rd of the month, then you owe him on the 3rd of the next month. I think it's worth negotiating that it's 30 days from the end of the month. And you say to people, well, if I get the goods, say in June, I get them on the 10th, that my 30 days starts running from the 30th of June, not from the 3rd of the month. Right. You know, it should be negotiate things like that, 30 days end of the month, little things like that.
Okay, Tony, there's a few questions that have come in here over the web here. One, in such a volatile economic environment, where do you get the key reliable indicators to allow you to make the decisions to continue or to fold the business?
From the trends, I would, I'd talk to my accountant and I'd say, give me a trend here of the turnover over the last, say, 5 years, and the trend of the gross profit, the trend of my costs, and then I'd look at the trends of that, and look at the trend of the gross profit line and the trend of the cost line, and extrapolate them out for the next 2 years, and they're going to cross or they're getting wider. Because it's not your income or your cost that matter, it's the difference between the two.
Right.
And the trend of that difference. Is the difference getting narrower or is it getting wider?
So really you're looking at...
Or can you influence that difference by a restructuring? Or have you a bigger problem in that the problem is that somebody's come out and made a different bun now that people are buying, and it really doesn't matter a darn how I influence the costs.
In fact, interestingly enough, one of the things we have here is our accountant actually just does graphs.
Absolutely.
Because it's rather than the ultimate figures, it's a graph. The graph's going the right way. If they're going the right way, you're right. You can count the figures afterwards.
Absolutely. Like you told me this way back in 1990 when I was presenting something to somebody, we were talking about change, and you said to me, the problem you have is you know too much about the business and you're trying to get everybody else to know as much. It's not necessary to know that. Just what's the graph here? Leave the numbers off it.
Yeah.
Okay. The thing is, if you keep the graph simple, and go back to Ashley's point earlier, it allows you to communicate more easily with staff, no matter what size your business is.
Don't put any numbers in the graph at all.
Show them the trends.
So, okay, so it's just basically that on that. Yeah. Somebody else on here was, as everybody knows, cash flow is king. However, there are a lot of companies reliant on one main customer. While you may be on top of things, how do you monitor or help your largest customer if you know financials are a weak area in their company?
Oh, terrible. That's a big problem. That's as bad as your own financial position. Because what happens if that customer, if you woke up this morning and you heard that customer unfortunately got killed in a car crash?
You're not.
Yeah. Right,
so you need to be assessing that customer like the bank's assessing you.
But they're kind of saying, like, that you're reliant on this customer and they've got an issue with cash. How much should you basically row in to help? I suppose that's what the fact that we come. You're the bank. How do you monitor or